What if your gift wasn't vision but punishment? What if the reason you're exhausted isn't because you're behind, but because you're chasing something the world was never designed to give you? There are people who don't just think ahead, they live there. They don't fantasize, they construct, they don't wish, they design. In silence without applause, they draw blueprints in their minds for a life more aligned, more elegant, more efficient. The INTJ doesn't want more, they want better, cleaner, smarter, flawless, and once they glimpse what could be, the present becomes intolerable. This is the origin of the impossible ideal. It doesn't come from pride. It comes from clarity, and clarity without compassion can become cruelty. They are the ones who see the inefficiencies others ignore, the contradictions in what people say and do, the wasted effort, the illogical decisions, the break in the pattern that no one else even notices. But seeing everything comes at a price. Because once you see the way things should be, you can't help but feel the weight of everything that isn't. And the flaw in the system is never just out there. Eventually it turns inward. The blueprint becomes a mirror. And what do they see? Not progress, not pride, gaps, cracks in the timeline, delays in discipline. Moments where they didn't live up to the perfect version of themselves they quietly compare every action to. And the tragedy? No one else knows. From the outside they look composed, efficient, focused, admired, promoted, complimented. But they hear none of it because deep down the voice says you're not there yet, so they try harder. Because maybe if they perfect it all, every action, every word, every plan, they'll feel that impossible moment enough. But perfection always moves the goalpost, and the closer they get, the further it drifts. This isn't discipline, this isn't excellence, this is a mind trapped inside a vision no one else can see, and the deeper the chase, the more everything else fades. Because when you're trying to match reality to something flawless, reality always loses. They say perfection is impossible, but they never tell you how devastating it is to believe that and still need it anyway. So you compromise, but only publicly. You say the right things, you laugh at the idea of being a perfectionist, but when the door closes, you adjust the line again, you recheck the numbers, you rewrite the message, you reframe the plan, not because anyone asked you to, but because you did, because the gap still haunts you, and no one sees it. They don't see the notebook with 10 versions of the same sentence, the late-night spreadsheet that no one asked for, the draft that got deleted because the tone was 1 degree off. They see the result, but they never see the cost, not the birthdays missed, not the joy postponed, not the people who stopped inviting you because you always said, not yet, not yet. Because the moment isn't perfect, the energy isn't right, the timing's just a little off. So you wait for the perfect mood, the perfect moment, the perfect version of you. You wait so long that one day you realize you've been saving the good wine for a night that never came, saving the big idea for a version of you that never quite arrived, holding your breath for a future that kept walking away. That's what no one understands about perfectionism. It's not about being the best, it's about avoiding the unbearable feeling of being ordinary, because ordinary means you didn't rise, didn't do it right, didn't become the one you saw in your head at 14, writing plans on graph paper while other kids played outside. And now? You're still writing, still building, still chasing the horizon that refuses to stop moving. Because what else can you do? When the idea is still so perfect and the reality is still so disappointing, you run faster, you optimize. You build with fire in your chest and a voice in your head that whispers almost, 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 until one day you wake up and realize you haven't felt joy in a long time. Only pressure, only performance, only progress with no arrival. Because when perfection is the goal, satisfaction becomes treason. And rest feels like failure, and eventually the work you loved becomes the weight you carry, quietly, alone, every day. You can only carry the impossible for so long before it begins to split you open. At first, it's subtle. A misfire, a hesitation. A small delay in a system you built to run with surgical precision. You brush it off, recalibrate, push through. But deep down, You feel it. Something's off. Not in the work, in you. The fire that once burned clean has turned acrid. What used to feel like excellence now feels like punishment. The deadlines you once welcomed now feel like chains. Still, you keep going. Because stopping would mean looking directly at something you've spent your whole life outrunning. What am I without the goal? But the goal keeps changing. And the more you refine, the more it escapes. Perfectionism doesn't reward you for effort. It doesn't care how long you worked. It only asks one question: why isn't it better? So you revise. And again, until your effort no longer feels like creativity, it feels like confession. You're not improving the work. You're trying to atone for being human. You smile in meetings, deliver the outcome. But inside, you're back in that room, staring at the project you can't seem to finish, chasing a version of yourself you've never actually met. And then, without announcement, it happens. You sit down, you open the file. The cursor blinks, but nothing comes. It's not that you're tired. You've worked tired before. It's that you're hollow. The ambition is still there, but it's detached, floating, like a lighthouse that no longer points to shore, and you think about it. The idea of walking away, not because you failed, but because you gave it everything, and it still wasn't enough. You remember a story. Jung, a composer who labored over his final symphony for 30 years, a piece no one ever heard, because in the end he burned it, lit a fire, fed it page by page, watched his life's greatest work turn to ash in his own hearth, not out of rage, but release, and afterward he smiled. Because sometimes the only way to be free of the impossible ideal is to destroy what it's attached to. You stare at your own creation and wonder, if I walked away, would I finally breathe? The answer doesn't come, but the fact that you're asking means something's changed. You're no longer chasing excellence, you're chasing silence, and that's when you realize this isn't about the work anymore, this is about you. There's no music in the background, no cinematic crescendo, just the low hum of a machine and the blinking of a cursor on a page that remains blank. This time you don't try to force it, you don't fix the line, you don't chase the spark, you don't rewind the problem, you sit still, not with urgency, but with a kind of reverence. Because maybe for the first time, you're beginning to hear the thing you've been silencing, yourself, not the critic, not the planner, not the strategist, the part of you that doesn't want to optimize, the part that doesn't care about perfect, the part that just wants to be. You remember something you read once, ancient quiet, we should find perfection through imperfection. The eternal exists because of the non-eternal. We find truth not despite our flaws, but through them. Suzuki Roshi said that, a Zen master who built his life around embracing the crack in the bowl, the chip in the surface, the silence in between. And suddenly the thought rises. What if I've been looking in the wrong place this whole time? What if perfection was never at the end of the path? What if it's been walking beside me, quietly, asking me to slow down? You think of that cracked water pot, the one from the story, the one that leaked every step of the journey and felt useless, until it looked back and saw flowers blooming on its side of the path. Flowers that only bloomed because of the water it dropped. You think of everything you've done that never felt right, every project you dismissed, every conversation where you didn't say the perfect thing, every moment you wished you'd been more, done more, shown up better. And now for just a second you ask, what if that was enough? What if the flowers were growing all along and you were too busy chasing the horizon to see them? What if this is the moment you finally forgive yourself for not being flawless? Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally understood that caring too much is what broke you. You close the file, not in defeat, in peace. There's still more to build, but it won't come from pressure. It'll come from presence. From the you that no longer needs to prove anything, from the you that finally understands perfection was never the goal, it was the illusion. And now in its absence, something real begins, something cracked, something unfinished, something alive. You don't walk away from perfectionism with a clean break. You crawl, you ache, you rise slowly, carrying the weight of everything you once believed would make you whole. You thought letting go would feel like failure, but now in the stillness you begin to feel something else, relief, not the kind that celebrates, the kind that forgives. You look at the wreckage of the dream you tried to force into flawless shape, blueprints, rewrites, the sleepless nights, and realize you don't hate it. You just don't need it to be perfect anymore, and that changes everything, because now you begin to notice what you missed along the way. The sketch you threw out still carried truth. The conversation you rewrote in your head still moved someone. The version you called not ready still meant something real to someone else. You start to see the things you never celebrated because they didn't feel polished, and realize they were honest. And maybe honesty is the real masterpiece. You remembered the cracked water pot, the one that leaked each day as it carried water from the river. Ashamed, it apologized to its bearer for being broken, but the bearer smiled and said, "Look behind you, I planted seeds on your side of the path, and every day you watered them, and now the flowers bloom because of the crack, not despite it." That story used to sound like comfort. Now it sounds like truth. You think of all the things you almost didn't share, the work you buried, the part of you that never felt finished, and you realize those were the parts that made you human, the parts that made you real. And now another story returns. The birds who flew to find the perfect king, who crossed valleys of fire, ego, and grief, only to find a still lake at the end. And in that lake, they didn't find a god. They found their own reflection. The Simurgh was never out there. It was them, together, transformed by the journey. And maybe you're the same. You thought you were building something that would prove your worth, but all along the work was building you, not toward perfection, toward integration. And now for the first time, you ask not what's next, but what's true. Not what will be admired, but what will be given. Because you're no longer chasing the ideal, you're standing in its shadow and realizing it was never meant to be reached. It was meant to call you forward so you could discover who you are along the way. And that discovery, that's the thing that stays, not the clean edges, not the perfect outcome, but the you who kept going. And that is enough. You return aware. You come back to the work, to the world, to yourself, not as someone who conquered the impossible, but as someone who outlived it. You still see the vision, but now it doesn't glare, it glows. The blueprint hasn't vanished, but it's no longer a measuring stick, it's a compass. And you're no longer sprinting, you're walking. You begin again, not to prove anything, but because something inside still wants to build, still wants to give. But this time, you create with presence, not pressure. You leave the door open before the room is perfect. You show the work before the edges are clean. You speak before the sentence is smooth. And the world responds, not with applause, with recognition. Someone says, "This helped." Someone says, "I felt that too." And for the first time, that's enough. You remember the words, "True perfection seems imperfect, yet it is perfectly itself." And now they don't sound like wisdom, they sound like home. Because you've spent years trying to become someone worth admiring. But now you've become someone worth being. Not because you finished, but because you finally stopped hiding. And when you look at your work, your life, your past, not as a critic, but as a witness, you see it all differently. Not as flawed attempts, but as sacred artifacts, proof that you cared, proof that you dared, proof that you kept showing up even when nothing felt good enough. And now, as you walk forward, you stop trying to hold it all together. You let it be what it is, not flawless, but alive, not polished, but loved, not perfect, but yours and the horizon. It no longer runs from you, it walks with you. Because this was never about becoming someone untouchable. It was about becoming someone true. And now you are. So you take a breath, you pick up the work, and you begin again, not perfectly, but fully.